Any city in Europe big enough to have a church had a fair. You would call it a Renaissance Fair, but it predated the Renaissance by many hundreds of years. Had a fair every Saturday. And if you could walk the countryside, you might stumble on 3 or 4 fairs going on within your walking distance of little cities in the area. And vendors like myself, and if you look out at the fairs that you've been to, every vendor there is temporary. And that was a tradition that started in the Middle Ages, because the church allowed you to set up on Saturday, but did not want anybody still up on Sunday to interfere with church services. So bright and early, Saturday morning, all of us that were selling would pack our wares in our wagon and rush off to be one of the first few into town, because the church would allow us to set up along the walls of the church. Crime really stayed in the Middle Ages, because where's the church in every medieval town? Right in the middle. So everyone had to pass by my booth twice during the day, once going in and once coming out, and I stood a much better chance of making a sale than, say, someone in the very back end of the fair. So I would set up like this. The church would never come to collect their fee in the morning, because, as you well figured out, I have no money in the morning, so they would, of course, have the good sense to wait until I had made the sale. And I would set up, and people like you would come, and we would sit and chit and chat about things and discuss the gossip in the area, and I would carry news from other towns to the townspeople. And it was a great place where culture sort of mixed, and where culture and language started to change. So, unfortunately, bright and early Saturday evening, I must pack everything else in my booth and put it in the wagon, and go home, because, as we said, the church did not want anybody messing up their church services. So all the booths in fairs like this were all temporary, which is true, because if you come to this fair in 6 weeks, you will not even know that there had been a fair on the site. Everyone would have gone. Except occasionally, the church would allow a booth to stay up all week, providing it was something the church needed on a day-to-day basis. For example, the writing paper booth. It got to stay up all week because it was a necessity. So it wasn't temporary, you see. It was stationary. Have you ever wondered why you call a piece of paper and a pen stationary? Because it was sold from the booth that never moved. And the priest would say to their acolytes, "Go down to the stationary booth and fetch me some writing paper and a pen." It's why the word stationary has 2 spellings. A-R-Y for the substances vended from the booth, and E-R-Y for the booth itself.
What's that?
Now, even money lenders would come to fair on Saturday to lend money out of booths like this. And money lenders would not keep written records of their transactions. They were easily in line of sight with everyone in the fair. And instead, to remind themselves of what they had done, they would cover their booth with a cloth that had been drawn out in 64 equal squares of alternating red and black material, and they would stack different sizes of coins in the ranks and files, and that way kept track of the transaction. Because at fair, moneylenders were known as exchequers, a game developed around a board of 64 squares of alternating red and black with stacks of coins, which you call checkers, of course. And in fact, when moneylenders had earned enough money to build permanent buildings, they did not want the people in the community to lose sight of the fact that they were common as everyone else and went to fair every Saturday. So they named their buildings after their benches. The Latin word for bench is banca. Now, at the end of the day, if I did not have enough money to pay the church their small licensing fee, there was almost nothing they could do to me. They could not lock me up. Jails really were not existent in the countryside. They could not hit me. For some strange reason, fairs were known as safe havens. You could not be struck, you could not be insulted, and in fact, so much so that murderers might escape prison to come to fair and be safe from prosecution as they followed the fair around the countryside, which is why carnivals have such a bad reputation now. So we've got this fair system, and we've got no way to punish me except the church would send out 2 very large churchmen with big hammers, and they would smash my bench to pieces. Now that would be a great hardship to me, because I would first then have to find some way to come up with the money to buy the wood, and then pay a carpenter to cut it exactly the right size. All benches at fair were exactly the right size, all the same. The church didn't want anybody with more money to build a bigger bench and thus display more wares than you. So I could be out of work for over a year. Let's review for a moment. What's the Latin word for bench? Banca. The Latin word for to break is ruptus. You see, I was banca ruptus. I had a broken bench. And now, for just a brief moment of your time, the words in your language that have made absolutely no sense to you whatsoever now make perfectly good sense if you lived in my time period. I thank you all for your interest.